want to keep silent for a few minutes before we start. Thank you.
Buenos días, queremos dar la bienvenida al Foro de Brecha Digital.
Thank you. Welcome to the Digital Divide Forum. It's an honor for us to have you with us. We invite you to actively participate through our social networks. Please be sure to ask questions and make comments through social media, or if you are joining us by Zoom, through the question and answer tool. Before we begin, just a reminder to please keep your microphones muted. And for today's first session, we will share an institutional video about several initiatives we have here at IICA with our partners. IICA Open Doors.
El Instituto Interamericano de Cooperación para la Agricultura es el organismo especializado en agricultura del Sistema Interamericano, con sede en Costa Rica desde el año 1942 y particularmente en el Cantón de Colnodo desde 1976. Costa Rica, además de ser uno de los 34 Estados miembros del ICA de las Américas, es el que alberga la sede central del instituto, así como la Dirección General y otras autoridades con alcance hemisférico.
Como director general del ICA, siento un honor y una responsabilidad al estar impulsando un ICA de puertas abiertas. Esto lo hacemos a través de diversos proyectos que tienen como objetivo acercarnos más a todas las personas a esta tan importante realidad de la agricultura y las comunidades rurales de las Américas.
El instituto cuenta con diversos proyectos que buscan fortalecer el acercamiento del público en general, no solo con el ICA, sino con la agricultura y las comunidades rurales de las Américas, bajo una política de puertas abiertas que permite el acceso del público a las instalaciones, pero que además utiliza los medios virtuales para facilitar el acceso a nivel hemisférico. El Fab Lab es un espacio colaborativo para la promoción, el desarrollo y la implementación de la agricultura digital a partir del incremento de capacidades y la alfabetización digital, así como la gestión de innovaciones para el sector agrario. Para enriquecer la experiencia 4.0, el ICA cuenta con el Centro de Interpretación del Mañana de la Agricultura, una fuerte apuesta para destacar el papel fundamental de las nuevas tecnologías en el sector agropecuario y su impacto en el bienestar de las familias que habitan las áreas rurales y urbanas a través de un espacio educativo virtual. La Casa Típica Rural evoca las tradiciones rurales de nuestro continente. Fue construida utilizando métodos centenarios como cimientos de piedra, muros de adobe y paredes de bareque, como un homenaje a las personas del campo y un espacio de diálogo agrícola entre los visitantes de diversas generaciones que facilita el conocimiento del pasado y presente rural. El ICA tiene programado uno de los proyectos más ambiciosos, la Plaza de la Agricultura de las Américas, un espacio de conexión e intercambio entre el ICA, la agricultura y la sociedad costarricense. Este proyecto será llevado a cabo en conjunto con la Municipalidad de Vázquez de Colnodo y fue declarado de interés público por el Gobierno de Costa Rica.
En este video estamos presentando estas iniciativas. Invitamos a todos y a todas a que exploren nuestra página y conozcan más sobre nuestros proyectos.
Para realizar la apertura oficial del foro, quiero
And now,
compartir.
to officially open this forum, I'd like to give the floor to our Director General, Mr. Manuel Otero.
Bueno, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Hemispheric Forum we've called Digital Divide, Reducing the Digital Divide in Latin America and the Caribbean's rural areas towards a digital agricultural revolution. With this, I'd like to welcome our partners who are an important part of this activity. And I am sure that this very relevant forum will help us share and exchange experiences for public-private action. I'd like to especially thank the participation of the Minister of Agriculture and Fishing of Antigua and Barbuda, Ms. Samantha Marshall, the Minister of Science, Technology, and Telecommunications of Costa Rica, Ms. Paula Vega, and our dear friend and Senator of the Republic of Mexico, Ms. Beatriz Paredes. And on behalf of these three wonderful women, I'd also like to extend our gratitude to all the participants, public and private institutions, international organizations that are present today. This initiative is no doubt a part of an important coordination of efforts we perform from IICA in favor of democratizing the agricultural digital revolution that is already happening in many of our countries. We are doing this along with our main mission, which is to support efforts for rural development and agricultural development in the Americas for it to reach all the regions and all the communities in our continent. Just a few weeks ago, here at IICA, along with our partners of IDB and Microsoft, we presented a study on the situation of connectivity in rural areas of Latin America and the Caribbean. And also, along with IDB, the IFDA, and Oxford University, another research specifically on the gender digital divide. Besides these studies, we also are fostering substantial changes on IICA's image. And therefore, with the support of Microsoft and Bayer, we have fostered initiatives like the Center for Interpretation of Tomorrow's Agriculture, CMAC. Also, very importantly, and with the support of the Ministry of Science and Technology of Costa Rica, we have developed the first digital fab lab that tries to provide specific solutions to the main issues that are dealing with family agricultural development. We consider digitalization of agriculture an essential tool to produce more and better, to create more income for producers, and especially for small farmers, to take better care of natural resources and better position our territories, rural territories, as areas of progress and opportunity in favor of the necessary change in generations. Digital agriculture also offers the opportunity of creating a substantial change in productivity and sustainability throughout the value chain. It allows farmers to access personalized information that can be processed in real time, thus revolutionizing the way in which rural communities protect and improve their livelihoods. The pandemic has made this topic, digital inclusion and rural connectivity, an indispensable issue. It was before coronavirus, but it is even more so now. And I want to be very clear on this. There is no possible transformation in agriculture based on genuine competitiveness, sustainability, and social inclusion if we do not close this debt by bridging the gap between rural and urban communities to foster rural connectivity. Reducing the digital divide is an indispensable and a priority, an indispensable notion and a priority in the center of our social fabric of our communities and rural areas of the Americas. It also means that we want to help rural territories and build them as areas for hope, creation of jobs, and breaking that perverse, vicious cycle of poverty, insecurity, and immigration. But if we remember, reducing this digital divide also means we have to promote the correct strategies to develop necessary skills in women, young people, and rural adults so that they may fully use the technologies available. We have 244 million people in Latin America and the Caribbean that have no access to the internet. Of those, 46 million people live in rural areas, where at least 77 million people do not have connectivity with the minimum quality standards. In the countryside, rural women are the least connected group among all the populations in Latin America and the Caribbean, as was seen in the study by with the IADB, IFDA, and Oxford University. Our rural women, who are the basis of our roots in the countryside, are at a disadvantage compared to rural men and also compared to women living in cities. That is why it is so important to foster the reduction of this gender digital divide, and we have to do it quickly. International organizations, government entities, the private sector, and civil society, technical cooperation, all of us are called to cooperate. We need a large coalition to transform, promote, and broaden the basis of connectivity, including once and for all rural areas of Latin America and the Caribbean, improving skills to take better advantage of digital options, and fostering the development of tools and content that is appropriate for all farmers in our continent. That is why we have the forum that joins us today. We all are aware of the advantages of the internet. During the pandemic, everyone has clearly seen that this network of networks allows us to study, work, sell, buy, collect, find information, make decisions, socialize even. Therefore, I am sure that this meeting will give us valuable information on public policy to move towards digitalization of our rural areas. It will also help us share experiences of digital agriculture and create a roadmap that we can jointly follow to truly reduce the digital divide. Before closing, I'd like to emphasize that this 2021 will be a very special year for many reasons. First of all, just as it happens every 2 years, on the 1st and 2nd of September, we will be calling our Inter-American Board of Agriculture, of Ministers of Agriculture, the maximum entity of IICA. A few weeks after that, we will have the Summit of Heads of State convened by the United Nations. In both cases, they will be covering the future of agricultural and rural areas, and I am sure that rural connectivity will come up to promote sustainable inclusion in our rural areas. Therefore, this forum has to be very productive. It has to become one more step towards our digital revolution that we are fostering from IICA along with our partners like IADB, Bayer, the International Telecommunications Network, Microsoft, the University of Cordova, the University of New Mexico, the Worldwide Foundation, PAD, and other friendly institutions. I am sure we will be coming closer together to face this challenge, to find more possibilities, rights, and a better quality of life in such a difficult time in history as a human civilization. Thank you very much. And of course, I wish we have a seminar that lives up to these circumstances. Thank you very much. Thank you, Director General. Going on with our agenda, I would now like to introduce the moderator for this session, Mr. Ronald Guendel. He's an agricultural engineer from the Iowa State University, an MBA of the Inter-American University of Costa Rica. He is currently the head of associations for Value Chain in Bayer. He started as a manager in Chiquita Brands International in Gas Caribbean before joining Bayer Crop Science as director for Northern Central American region. Throughout his career in Bayer, he has had several different positions, including leadership in business for fresh fruits in Latin America. In 2007, he transferred to Germany, where he has held several positions, such as Global Manager of Relations with the Value Chain and Global Head of Food Security. As such, he has led important projects, collaborating with transnational companies of the food chain, NGOs, international organizations, and regional organizations. He has worked closely with IICA and other entities in developing BIGAP, which is a service program offered throughout the world, promoting and providing training for producers throughout the world on good agricultural practices. Mr. Guendel, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Thank you, Dr. Manuel Otero, Lloyd, Jorge, Viviana, and colleagues and friends at IICA. It's an honor for me to moderate this session on the digital divide, importance, challenges, and opportunities. Before I give the floor to our distinguished guests and experts, I'd like to give some brief comments, especially on the importance of collaborating among the public and private sectors. This is something that is more and more pressing, especially in this digital era. Food insecurity is rising. Global ambitions to put an end to hunger will not become true unless we have revolutionary technologies. And not just that, but we should ensure that these technologies are truly used to benefit all those working in agriculture. Our agricultural systems are fragile, as we heard already from Mr. Otero. The challenges of COVID-19 brought to the table the fact that we urgently need to ensure that our food systems are more resilient. Restrictions for the circulation of food and temporary workers led to greater food insecurity. The digital tools can help close these physical gaps, providing farmers viable access to markets and improving traceability throughout the food chain. We have the best possibilities for success if we combine technologies and resources from the private sector with the infrastructure and the regulations and standards of the public sector. Therefore, we have to find the best ways for both sectors to collaborate so that we can find new technologies used in agriculture. A good example of collaboration that makes us very proud to share as Bayer is what we have with IICA. This partnership has been truly important for Bayer, especially for the footprint that it has gotten in all the Latin American region, fostering good agricultural practices through our BIGAP program, and many of these courses are offered digitally through IICA's platforms. Bayer is also part of the alliance against Fusarium DR4, which is a terrible disease that is destroying banana plantations everywhere in the world. Bayer, along with IICA, decided to take leadership and create a coalition to find solutions for this disease. An important way to prevent this disease is by providing training for thousands of banana producers with digital tools and have satellite maps of the infection foci. We are also very proud to be one of the first companies to support CIMAG, the Interpreting Center for Tomorrow's Agriculture, in having a permanent exhibit showing young people in Latin America how important it is to bring new technologies to agriculture, how they transform the way we harvest our food more sustainably. Bayer is fully committed to rural areas in Latin America and the world. We have a world strategy to train millions of small farmers, men, women, young people, and our goal is to empower 100 million small producers throughout the world with different technologies, including digital tools. For many years now, we've been connecting world producers to each other, especially small agro-exporters with small value chains under our special partnerships. We're also very eager to promote digitalization in projects for carbon capture in agriculture. Therefore, we are fully committed with IICA in the project Living Soils of the Americas, where Bayer will provide for IICA digital tools that can help us improve the quality of soil and capture carbon to ensure sustainability and eventually having it become a good business for producers in the region. Worldwide, and especially in Latin America, we're progressing towards accepting the fact that no person, company, government, or entity can save and close these digital divides by working in isolation. We need to foster significant collaborations that go beyond the typical commercial or political borders. The members of the panel are already attuned to this. So let's see how others can join us in this idea and have this digital movement become stronger. With that, I would like to now open the floor for Mr. Pablo Palacios. He will be talking about digitalization in Latin America and the Caribbean, opportunities and challenges for the rural environment as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. A few words on Mr. Palacios. He is a telecommunications engineer. He studied in Ecuador and later got an MBA in Germany. He has about 20 years of experience nationally and internationally in telecommunications. He has worked in different institutions and companies in Ecuador. Since 2010, he is part of the International Telecommunications Union. He worked for 3 years in Geneva in the commissions that studied different areas of this union. In 2013, he joined the team of the UTI for the Americas region. He is now located in Santiago, Chile, and he is a focal point for the Americas on cybersecurity and new energy sources. Welcome, Pablo, and we're very eager to hear from you. Good morning, and thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me and allowing us to share some of our information in this event. I'd like to talk about opportunities and the use of telecommunications technologies in rural areas. As an introduction, in 2018, according to the global index that we have at ITU for use of ICTs, we had over 51% of the world population connected. Where do we have the other 49%? Well, before the pandemic, we had that number, but now we have seen the great need of connecting the remaining 49%. We can see here that there was an increase, and it's even sharper now, to using mobile cellular subscriptions and networks. Sometimes there's more cell subscriptions than inhabitants in a country, but that does not mean that every person in that country has a mobile phone. It just means that certain sectors could have more cellular networks or subscriptions, and others have no subscriptions of the sort. So there's an unequal distribution in the use of these technologies and devices. Here we also see the number of broadband subscriptions per inhabitants and by region. There's a slower growth for fixed broadband subscriptions, and now it's more predominant in mobile 4G networks. If we look at fixed broadband, it offers greater speed, for example, more than 10 megabits per second or unlimited. But why does not everyone have access? That's the question. And the inconvenience. We've had several studies in the region of the Americas for e-agriculture in Chile. We also worked on a plan for Trinidad and Tobago. We had several studies on 5G international interconnectivity in Andean countries, and also global activities of e-agriculture. And we've reached several conclusions, including, for example, for international interconnectivity, in many cases, it is much cheaper to connect an urban area in one country with the United States through a fixed connection and fiber optic than two areas of the same country or the city in the rural area. There's many factors that determine the higher costs that limit this connection or the deployment of infrastructure and the provision of telecommunications services for rural areas, and especially agricultural areas. It's very clear that we need greater coverage in rural sectors, depending on the topography of the countries as well. In Latin America, we have some countries that have great differences in their terrains that cover from 4,000 meters above sea level to sea level. And some countries have a more convenient international connection more than within the country, even if they don't have direct access to cables, to submarine cables. After this, we determined also that there's costs of infrastructure, deployment of cables, local taxes, maintenance costs, and just the fact of even protecting networks from sabotage or theft. There's many other factors that also weigh on these inconveniences and mean that there's not a great deployment of infrastructure inside countries, besides the amount of traffic generated by them. So when we did our 5G studies in the different countries, we saw that most countries in South America are now, and worldwide as well, trying to launch pilot plans for 5G in rural areas. And there's a big concern there. Besides the current digital divide, with 5G technology deployment, this divide can become larger. The recommendation we have is not launching previous networks or giving the concession of the frequency with a certain contract. And we need some kind of an approach to different operators and different beneficiaries of the technology in a more cross-cutting manner that helps us have a national plan to implement these technologies. A national plan that does not just include technology sectors, but also agriculture. It could be fishing, tourism, education, even medicine, different sectors that could benefit from this new connectivity. And there, 5G can improve production, real-time communication, transmission of data in real-time, processes from remote areas, not just connectivity as the solution. We also need knowledge. It would not be a good idea to just get everyone connected if people don't know how to use the new technology. So there's a great demand for digital literacy in rural areas and in areas where we have small-scale producers. We need to provide training, digital literacy, not just on the use of technologies and using social media or entertainment, but to manage this information, to compile it with sensors that can help convey this information to then interpret it.
For example, early warnings in the case of emergencies, and we can certainly have different forms to approach this for the urban and rural sectors. For the rural sectors, we need greater power, greater frequency, higher frequency, machine-to-machine connections, and in the rural sector, in the urban sector, a specific way, a determined manner. When we carried out these studies, several of the complaints, I guess, of the peasants, of the farmers, had to do with sustainable energy, low noise in the rural areas. This also produces environmental pollution as well as problems to the animals and the flora and fauna because of the fear of electromagnetic waves related to these towers, for example. Another complaint or a comment was the lack of information or the difficult access to updated information, important data. And one of the complaints was, okay, we have the connection, but to get the information, we need to have paid to get that information or the data. So through government initiatives, we can provide them data. So we can help them not only by providing them that information, but giving them valid information that they can use on the ground. They were talking about the need for information in real time. And something else they mentioned was that there is a lot of technology that they do not even know that exist, and they do not know the cost and do not understand the benefits that this could bring. So there is also this lack of experts in the field, experts that can go out to the field and work with them and train them. This is the outcome of a very interesting study carried out by ECLAC regarding the utilization of ICTs in rural and urban areas in Latin America and several countries, as you can see. The study is quite interesting. Notice this dates 2020. And this has to do with the use of digitalization in COVID-19. We can see IICA agriculture strategy development. We need to work on this together. We have been working with several countries. There's a study with several reports from Asia, Europe, and Asia. These are countries that carried out several case studies, the use of drones, how to track or how ICTs could help with traceability of safe food products and the use of technology to map agricultural sectors and to automate processes. And then we have this is a project carried out together with the FAO. E-agriculture in action reports are the names of this. This is all available on our website. And the different ICT applications. These are very interesting cases. I would recommend you examine them. 5G, for example, can give us real-time information, and this will help reduce infrastructure using cloud applications. These are things we have been learning through 5G to improve or optimize the use of the current infrastructure utilization of artificial intelligence, the AI, excuse me. We are working on all these aspects in the different studies. A new study will be published now in 2021. Another important aspect we have here, for example, is this report. This was developed in 18 different countries. You can download it from the ITU website. We have Central Asia, Europe, and the methodology consisted of a series of questionnaires and a series of analyses that were examined and this could serve as a model to implement in Latin America and the Caribbean because it could clearly explain the situation in our countries. Now, what actions did we take in this report? Well, we first examined the regulatory framework, the capacity for development and empowerment, the financial side, obviously, and insurances, traceability to ensure food safety. We know that from the point of origin to its end point or end point of consumption, all the processes it went through. Then there's another section on agriculture innovation systems, sustainable farming, disaster risk management, and early warning systems. And this we worked on in this something very interesting for Central America and the Caribbean. And lastly, we have the enhanced market access. As part of the report, there is a series of pillars that we use as reference on the government side and investing in infrastructure in rural areas, interoperability, which was another aspect where we had received many complaints. We have a provider, and if we purchase from a provider, we will have to continue working with that provider only because there is not much interoperability among providers. So, with this new system, we will be able to open up more options. And ITU will work as standardizing and generating interoperability for the use of these technologies in this field that has yet much to explore, as is agriculture, and which, as the moderator has just said, becomes ever more important, ever more critical to sustainably manage and handle natural resources such as water and caring for agriculture. One of the recommendations of this report, and we have we are sharing here for you, for the strategy specifically developed for Chile, is that agriculture should be a way to be right in the heart of national digital planning. A critical application that should be taken into account and which has not been the case in the past is that in the National Telecommunications Plan should include the agriculture sector, the rural sectors, as an important cross-cutting line as the foundation of the country, providing telecommunications or intercommunication, ICTs as part of the national programs. Monitoring and evaluation of each phase for the implementation of the national digital strategies and horizontal coordination among the different interested sectors. So I guess these were my comments, very brief. I once again thank you very much for the invitation. I will be open to any comment or question you may have. Once again, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much, Pablo, for your comments. Very interesting. Very interesting explanation, particularly all the technical side. Let us continue now And perhaps at the end, Pablo, if it is fine with you, we can leave the questions until the end, but let us move to the next speaker. And perhaps at the end of the different presentations, we will have some questions for you. So now let us continue talking about digital divide and the current situation of connectivity in rural areas in Latin America and the Caribbean. This is a study between among IICA, Microsoft, and IDB. Mr. Federico Villarreal, Director of Technical Cooperation of IICA, will be in charge of this presentation. Briefly about Federico. He has a PhD in geography from the University of Buenos Aires and a master's in social studies, agricultural social sciences from the School of Social Sciences. He is currently Director of Technical Cooperation at IICA. So we are very open to hear what you have to share, Federico. Hello, good morning. Thank you so very much, Ronald. Good morning, everyone. On this occasion, and through IICA cooperation, I will refer, as Ronald just mentioned, I will talk about the digital divide and the current situation of connectivity in rural areas in Latin America and the Caribbean. Next, I will focus particularly on the study, several aspects, highlighting fundamental aspects of the study on rural connectivity in Latin America and the Caribbean, a bridge to sustainable development times of the pandemic. This study was presented late October last year and is a significant contribution with information and recommendations to move forward with connectivity to overcome the digital gaps. Before I refer to the data and the information on these gaps and divide, the connectivity divide and other gaps related to it, I believe it is worth first highlighting the authors of this paper, Sandra Siegler, Joaquin Arias, Matias Boccio, and Kimberly Camacho. And in the framework of this forum, Manuel Picado, Viviana Palmieri, Jose Arce, whom have done a lot of hard work together with the IICA team to hold this forum headed by Dr. Otero, our Director General. I apologize to those of you that did not hear the first part. I was talking about the characteristics of this study, the general framework, the authors, and those that helped produce this study, Sandra Siegler, Billy Camacho, as well as a couple of other colleagues, and they have driven this forum headed by our Director General, specifically Manuel Picado and all the team of the, and Viviana Palmieri, Jose Arce from Technical Corporation, and all the team at the Institute that has made this forum possible. I would like to highlight also the promotion that of all these studies is made by Dr. Jorge Duarte, whom heads this initiative and also fosters the development of such studies and strategic partners related to promoting these actions. So in this sense, and particularly related to the study, I would like to thank our strategic partners, particularly the IDB and Microsoft, who trusted in this project right from the day one and trust in continuing forward to overcome this digital divide with along with other partners that are present today. Well, on the next slide, we show essentially the status of connectivity in Latin America and the Caribbean. Next slide, please. Here, we see that 32% of the population in Latin America does not have access to internet services. 71% of the urban population does have connectivity, whereas 37%, only 37% in the rural area are adequately connected. these figures show great heterogeneity within the countries and even within the region, but not because of this do they cease to be significant regarding the framework in which this takes place. And in this line, the study also showed a very revealing index, the significant rural uh, index, aside from analyzing the connectivity being connected or not, also involves other dimensions that also allow to qualify the characteristics of that connectivity. And I refer to data that were mentioned a moment ago. 77 million in rural inhabitants of 24 countries do not have access to connectivity with the minimum quality standards required to take advantage of the benefits of being connected. So this means that being connected is not the sole condition. Although it is a necessary condition, it is not the sole one. Being well connected is fundamental to ensure we achieve the benefits or tap the benefits brought about by this situation. So this perhaps is the first gap in connectivity, but it is not the only one, as Pablo Palacios mentioned. And as we will see now, being connected is a necessary condition, but not sufficient to work together with the connectivity and quality. And by not being connected, well, this significantly affects not only the well-being of the population, but also its economic development. Now, what is the cost of the connectivity gap? And here we have some indicators. These are figures from the International Telecommunications Union 2018 on mobile and broadband. An increase worldwide of 1% in the arrival of fixed bandwidth increases the GDP in 0.08. And with mobile broadband, it is almost double, almost 0.15% of GDP. So we can see the difference between these. And in these same lines, we have digitalization. An increase in 1% in the digital ecosystem development index results in an increase of 0.13% of GDP. And the digital ecosystem impacts the work productivity, considering a 1% increase in the digital ecosystem will lead to an increase in 0.20%, 26% in productivity. Beyond the suffering of this inequality, that is the lack of connectivity, we recognize a series of economic impacts that cannot be ignored and that necessarily highlight the, I guess, the need to advance and the convenience of doing so. In economic terms, reducing the gap in connectivity means adding greater value to production. GDP, by definition, shows us precisely this value added associated to connectivity. And these figures basically reveal the potential of advancing in digitalization. Next, please. Connectivity gap, and as the DG was mentioning a moment ago, not only are associated or are linked, they are linked to other gaps. For example, access of women. So this is another gap in the rural area. We have a gender gap in ownership of mobile telephones in Latin America and the Caribbean. Connectivity is not just being connected, but having the device, therefore. And this is worsened in the case of rural women. There is an additional division of women that live in rural areas because these are much less connected than women that live in urban areas. And within the least favored group, they are even less favored. And countries where gender digital gaps are less, well, the gender gap is also less regarding vulnerable employment, youth unemployment, and participation in the workforce. So we see these indicators And we see that they basically increase the effects of this type of situation on women and youth. Lastly, there is a whole aggregation of gaps in the at the rural level. If we see the potential of education and connectivity, we can see the benefits or lack of benefits in that area. Education is a condition that needs to be addressed because this will lead to help overcome and provide the necessary skills to transform agriculture without leaving anyone behind. The connectivity gap associated to education can be expressed from several angles. Fundamentally, and only just to present some information about this, in Latin America, 33% of the schools have sufficient broadband or internet speed. That is, 67% is not well connected, and less than 15% of the rural schools have access to sufficient bandwidth or internet speed. So 85% of the rural schools cannot have adequate access to the benefits of connectivity throughout the hemisphere. This, no doubt, shows the future potential of connectivity, and it is urgent to address this issue to begin to overcome it as soon as possible, particularly in view of the needs arisen by COVID and now coming towards the end of my comments. The study shows a series of recommendations. We just mentioned a few on this slide. The recommendations are very much aligned with what Pablo Palacios was just mentioning, as well as Ronald. And these focus on developing public policies that urgently and assertively address this situation. Policies are also related to the need to generate data and information that will allow these policies to be adequately designed and their results and impacts be measured. Access to powerful devices to access the benefits of digitalization. This is fundamental. Policies must also be aimed at access to devices to ensure connectivity, adequate connectivity in line with modern days and the potential this has. None of these policies would make sense if we do not promote private investment. None of this can be done if we do not involve the private sector. And in this, the public sector has a big responsibility here, inevitable. And last and not least, but precisely because it connects with what the points we are discussing, is we must ensure content and feed demand, nurture demand, develop the skills and provide adequate content. This is necessary. We need the content as well as the skills that each user of connectivity may have in order to access the benefits of connectivity, particularly in rural areas. And now, wrapping up, as the Director General mentioned, what we are doing is basically a call to close these gaps and accelerate connectivity of rural territories. A gap that, to be addressed, represents new and major challenges. For example, the importance of developing content that can help reduce the digital gap. And the resolution of connectivity is the first necessary step, but not sufficient to advance in solving the digital divide. But we also need to develop skills and contents, as has been said. We're talking about a gap that calls for access to education, to security, to health, and many other things that ensure the quality of life of inhabitants, both in rural as well as in urban areas. Connectivity of rural people, particularly women and children and youth, will improve marketing, connectivity, and will empower the least favored groups, and will disseminate information to improve crops and yields, improve good agricultural practices, and generate more revenue and the quality of life, particularly in the rural areas, for food systems in general. This transformation aligns in turn with others that at IICA, with the leadership of our Director General Manuel Otero and our strategic partners, make us feel so very proud and fit within the open IICA with open doors. And I'm talking about the Fab Lab, particularly with strategic partners that help us be do more and be better in such an urgent area. Connectivity and closing this digital divide, more than a need, is a demand for international cooperation, and institutions must take part of this. The World Food Summit, to be held in October this year, is a space to position this subject matter on the global agenda. This forum is a relevant milestone to continue to work tirelessly to, in this case, close the digital divide and all gaps related to it. For example, the gender gap. Thank you very much. Thank you so very much, Federico. Thank you for your excellent presentation. And now we have a few questions, but just as we did with Pablo, but we will slightly change the process or the agenda and move directly into our panelists for the day. And we will leave the questions to the end for all group, for the entire group. So we will now hear the panel, the digital divide and development in. And the first speaker will be Senator Beatriz Paredes. Beatriz is a graduate from the Autonomous University of Mexico. She additionally has a postgraduate in Hispanic American literature obtained in Spain. She has served her country under different positions, political positions. She is currently a senator. She held other positions as Congresswoman, federal Congresswoman, and Senator Undersecretary at the Secretariat of the Interior on 3 different occasions, and Undersecretary of Agriculture Reform. And she is also chair of the Revolutionary Institutional Party, PRI. She was also ambassador of Mexico to Cuba and Brazil, and also chair of the Latin American Parliament, being the first woman and the second Mexican in occupying this position. She has received outstanding recognitions, among which the Ford Woman of the Year, awarded by the International Women's Forum, Orden de la Soledad from the Republic of Cuba, Orden de Carnaval de Sol by the Federal Republic of Brazil, the Inter-American Award for Participation of Women in Rural Development, awarded by IICA in 1986, and Woman of the Year in Mexico in 1985. It is an honor, Senator, to hear your words.
Thank you very much, Ronald, for that extensive introduction. I'm not really very accustomed to hearing bios or CVs before my introduction. The important thing is that I am very interested in agriculture, and I have the privilege of leading the largest farmers association of my country, the Farmers Confederation. I'd like to congratulate the Director General of IICA, my esteemed friend Manuel Otero, and the IICA as a whole for organizing this forum. It is a pleasure for me to participate, and I especially wish to greet the Madam Ministers that are joining me as well, in particular Minister Samantha Marshall from the Caribbean region, and greetings also to all the distinguished speakers. Although I am the president of the Commission of Foreign Affairs for Latin America and the Caribbean of the Mexican Senate, I'd like to also say that I am a part of a group of honorary ambassadors of IICA. This is something that makes me very proud. For my intervention, I will directly reflect my point of view as a personal opinion to be part of this discussion. I will not repeat the data that we've already heard, but I fully agree with Federico Villarreal. The study prepared by IICA, ADB, and Microsoft on rural connectivity in Latin America and the Caribbean, Bridge for Sustainable Development during pandemic times, which was published in October 2020, is absolutely fundamental as input. So I congratulate the authors. This is certainly a wonderful tool to help us analyze this very relevant topic. I wish to comment some of the elements of the issue without insisting on the data, which have already been shared by previous speakers. Half of the countries of Latin America have specific measurements on connectivity in the rural areas. Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, Brazil, Costa Rica, Chile, Ecuador, El Salvador, Honduras, Dominican Republic, Mexico, Paraguay, Peru, and Uruguay. There's another number of countries that do not have these measures. The scarcity of data available is because official statistics don't capture information on connectivity, differentiating between urban and rural areas. The creation of global goals that do not pay attention to disfavored environments means we have to double our efforts to ensure coverage. This also means we need dialogue with those who are looking at the parameters the statistics study. The limitations we have on information mean that we cannot truly measure the gaps and divides in rural connectivity and the possibility of having an evaluation that can be based on evidence to then formulate public policies. There's a series of factors that create barriers to expanding connectivity, and it is its eventual arrival to our most remote and dispersed areas. If we look at the difficulties in infrastructure, we have to say that challenges and obstacles in universal access also mean that there's problems due to the state of infrastructure in countries, lack of electricity, conditions of roadways and highways, high costs of investment, and lower costs of effectiveness for operating companies. There's also a scarcity of stimulus to foster greater investment in the rural areas. There's lack of access to the most remote areas, whether by geography or because of violence in these areas. There's also difficulty in accessing devices and larger and higher costs for mobile phone and internet for people living in rural and remote areas. There's also obsolete frameworks, a lack of maps of infrastructure that truly gives us the information on telecommunications networks that can help us identify which areas are not receiving coverage and could be easily connected. I will give you more data, as I said, because we are in a session of experts. However, I do wish to give us some theoretical concepts on the problem we are facing. I will then send IICA a broad explanation of this. I will try and be concise for my participation on this occasion. Social inequalities in the rural world, in the world of agriculture, have been quite marked and clear in universal history because of a lack of access to land. Land used to be the essential value that defined inequality. This huge gap was resolved by people, by populations and communities directly, many times through farmers' mobilizations, farmers' movements. They reivindicated access to land, and they managed to get access to land. Other times, this pressure from farmers led to broad agricultural reform processes that led to a redistribution of rural land. So access to land has marked inequalities between the rural world and the world of landowners, the world of small farmers and large landowners, and has led to clear differences in development of agriculture with access to other elements of production. However, the history of the world in these times has seen a qualitative change, a very profound change based on the technological revolution. Access to technological goods requires other instruments. It is not enough to have mass mobilization of farmers for one group of farmers to access the land or to access these technologies. It's not enough to make the decision of redistributing these technological resources. This is because access to technological goods in our current world requires resources, monetary resources, to be able to acquire these goods. And this again is a profound qualitative change. It requires knowledge. People need to know how to use them. For the very first time, the possibility of overcoming inequality has an intangible basis, which is the basis of knowledge. And this can only be acquired through educational processes. That's why I fully agree with the presentation by the previous speaker. It's fundamental to think not just about access and connectivity by itself, but also guaranteeing training processes, education processes, generalized education for rural communities and the less favored populations to have a true possibility of making use of this technology. Additionally, we have a new era. We have now sophisticated goods that can only be managed universally or through large corporations. Connectivity, for example, digitalization, but most especially connectivity. This transcends the resources of many small states that we have in our region. As such, there's absolutely a need to have a different kind of willingness to act that transcends the possibilities of farmers' organizations and of communities to overcome and transform the digital divide. We need a solidarity commitment with small producers and small and indigenous communities of national states. States need to have clear connectivity policies. They need to ensure access to technological input. They need to provide technological input for our educational structure to transform educational programs and curricula so that we have these as part of the knowledge shared there. Solidarity from the international community so we can have a universal agreement with the large providers of technological tools, of installation of networks, so that there are affordable costs for less favored populations and for smaller states. We need solidarity from international organizations. And in that sense, this event at IICA is a clear mark of this. And also, it's important to ask ourselves if we need constitutional reforms to highlight the right to connectivity. Now, today, connectivity is a value that determines inequalities in the future for different social classes. I believe it is essential for international financial organisms to have financing programs to broaden coverage. COVID-19 and the needs we've seen in several countries to continue education online are clear evidence of how our educational systems need first quality connectivity. We also need an agreement among international organizations. I suggest a meeting between IICA, FAO, and UNESCO to establish a package of educational programs and subjects and courses to develop skills and content that can truly contribute to all educational systems of international organizations so that we can have a massive training and education strategy to ensure the use of digital technologies of our times. Finally, the technological revolution, also for those of us who are social leaders and who understand the social realities, it presents conceptual challenges. Conceptual challenges, and challenges very different from those that transformed the realities of the 19th and 20th centuries. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Senator Beatriz Paredes. Just as a comment, I really love how you highlighted the right to connectivity. I live in Europe, and I can tell you that this is a constant discussion there. I believe it is fundamental to bring this also to the table in Latin America. It has to be a priority for political agendas. People, just as they have a right to education, should have a right to connectivity. So thank you, Senator, for your comments. We now have the presentation by Ms. Samantha Marshall, Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Provide some information about Samantha Nicole Marshall is the Minister of Social Transformation and Human Resource Development of Antigua and Barbuda, with responsibility for youth and gender affairs in her portfolio. Mr. Marshall is an attorney at law that was elected to political office in 2014 to serve the people of St. Mary South, and also appointed as a member of the cabinet of Antigua and Barbuda. Minister Marshall is the first of the two elected female of the majority in the lower house in the cabinet of Antigua and Barbuda. Minister Marshall also served in 2015-2018 as Minister of State in the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands, Fisheries, and Barbuda Affairs. Welcome, Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Just a correction, that was my former biography, because I am now officially transitioned to the Ministry of Agriculture, of Fisheries, and Barbuda Affairs in Antigua and Barbuda. First, let me recognize you, the distinguished moderator, and of course, our fellow distinguished panelists, and of course, our Director General, Mr. Manuel Otero for IICA, and my fellow panelists and participants. Let me take the opportunity to bring you warmest greetings from the government and people of Antigua and Barbuda. And first, let me thank IICA for inviting me to be a part of this panel and to share with you a few thoughts on bridging the digital divide, particularly with and among disadvantaged groups in our rural areas. In my brief presentation, I'll talk about the information and communication technologies, known as the ICTs, as a necessity, which is required to change our mindset and how ICT-centered policy measures uplift rural areas and bridge the digital divide. When we talk about the digital divide, we are talking about a socioeconomic term and condition that describes the reality of inequality and inequitable access to ICTs. For quite some time now, access to ICTs has been an ostentatious desire, a luxury beyond the means of many across society, particularly those living and working in rural areas. Despite the proliferation of the internet, technological devices, the digital services, there remains a gap, a divide, a gulf between the haves and the have-nots. Falling within the latter category, the persons most affected are socioeconomically and even physically disadvantaged. However, I see there is hope. And once we who are sitting here as policymakers, experts, professionals, see access to ICT as a necessity, the divisions slowly unite bit by bit, empowering all, particularly those in the rural agricultural sector, to become more efficient, more productive, and more diversified. Access to ICTs is and must always be a necessity leading to sustainable growth and development. In a sense, we have at some point taken our rural farmers and their farms for granted as a preserve of time long gone. As a result, little was invested, whether in financial resources or attention, in some of these rural areas, because we did not see the rural areas as having the transformative potential to become socioeconomic growth engines. Now that we have begun to move away from that prejudice mindset, we are now beginning to see the re-revolutionizing of agriculture in those areas. What I'm saying here is that bridging the digital divide starts with us right here. It requires us to bridge that divide in our individual psyche, in our efforts across society, deep into rural areas to level up and unleash the potential therein. The government of Antigua and Barbuda particularly, given the current situation, and with the assistance of the international partners such as IICA, had to realign its priorities to ensure that ICTs are at the heart of the leveling up and unleashing the potential in the rural agricultural areas. To highlight a few initiatives that we are doing in this regard, my government continues to promote the Prime Minister's Entrepreneurial Fund, which is an avenue for rural entrepreneurs to invest in integrating ICTs into their agricultural business. The government also encourages and supports rural agricultural entrepreneurs to engage with social media to advertise, share useful information, network, and inspire others into farming. This has been incredibly successful within our small jurisdiction, as I, along with scores of persons across society, were inspired by the social media activity to start our little backyard gardens individually. Additionally, being identified as one of the few countries, we recently partnered with IICA to launch the pilot programs for the Agri Extension app, which will ensure that farmers have direct and immediate access to extension, advisory, and other information services from the Ministry of Agriculture. This app was recently launched in Antigua and Barbuda. Moreover, we continue to encourage and support young tech developers to avail themselves of the capacity available at our Science and Innovation Park here in Antigua and Barbuda, and to find ICT solutions to issues that are unique to our small island developing states. As we look ahead, we see many opportunities to reinvigorate our rural areas and transform them into net contributions to socio-economic growth and development. There is a potential for more employment opportunities, poverty reduction, greater efficiency and productivity, and of course, a higher standard of development in the lives and livelihoods of those in rural areas. With these opportunities also come challenges, such as the willingness to learn about and embrace new technologies, the availability of capital and human resources, even at the government level. Access to developmental financing is also difficult. There is also the slow time it takes to develop local capacity in specialist areas and issues dealing with the low uptake for rural areas to become climate smart. As I wrap up, when we look closer at potential implications, one further, in fact, an obvious one comes to mind, and that is the potential of risk of losing applied traditional methods and even identity with all combined to form part of the unique cultural identity of most rural areas. On this point, as we seek to introduce ICTs, consideration must be given in terms of how such methods and identity can be preserved for future generations to know their history. This effort requires us to work with individual communities to develop programs and activities, like competitions, educational programs, and even approved preservations that can exist alongside ICT incorporation and in turn be another economic activity for rural areas. Therefore, as I conclude, let us play our part in bridging the digital divide. Let us, during the upcoming sessions, to focus on practical and effective solutions to assist lawmakers and policymakers like myself in bridging the gap between knowledge and action to catalyze fair and equitable access to ICTs and the uniting of the divisions in our beloved rural communities. I wish this forum the very best, and I look forward to engaging with as many individuals as I possibly. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Ministra Marshall.
Thank you very much, Minister Marshall, for your words. We now have Ms. Lilian Chamorro.
Es ingeniera electrónica.
Ms. Chamorro is an electronics and telecommunications engineer, specialist in engineering projects and management. She has worked as a project manager for community networks with Colnodo, the NGO from Colombia. She's worked with them since 2004, developing, implementing, and researching technologies and projects for ICTs with rural communities based on gender, education, and government. She's part of the Women's Rights Program for Progress of Communication and the project Connecting the Disconnected. Thank you very much, Lilian. You have the floor.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this panel because it allows us to tell us a bit about what we are doing in the civil society and within the communities regarding bridging the digital divide. I thank IICA for its report and for considering these endogenous solutions and for highlighting them. Sometimes this work that is done within the communities is not shown off enough, is not displayed enough. These are big efforts, many processes. Sometimes we only focus on the results and not on the process itself. So I would like to share that with you. I am very honored to share this panel with such outstanding people. There is so much to say, so I hope I do not take more than my time. To start with, I would just like to say that this emergency situation has represented significant changes for everyone. In rural communities, basically, well, in Colombia, many of communities had to block total access to their territories because they did not have the health infrastructure to protect themselves against the pandemic. So, this situation of isolation made it much more difficult to move around and have access to education, to market, to other things, and also jeopardizes what is most important, the relationship, collective life, the exchange of information within the communities themselves. And we see that some of the measures taken to overcome this issue, well, is to access technology. So, in many of these communities, the only technology that has been able to arrive, and we have talked about figures and the limited access in these communities, has been limited to internet. So, the only technology available is radio. The and easily deployable has been appropriate for these communities, despite the technological side. But basically, the production of content, these communities have learned how to develop their own content, the content in their native languages to keep the people informed, to keep them connected under such a difficult circumstance. And we have flagship events in Latin America, the network of rural radio stations in Argentina is very important, and that precisely shows us how agricultural development is related to radio and technology, and how the communities become active players, protagonists in their communication media. Well, this part of the pandemic, what has it done? Well, increase work in several areas, but the rural population is the least connected. About 70% of the rural population does not have connection to internet. In some countries or areas, Bolivia and Colombia, less than 3% of the population is connected. In the last few years, we have seen a limited growth of coverage in mobile telephony. Efforts have focused lately on the 5G technology, and we know this technology is not going to bring solution to rural areas. It focuses much more on urban areas, and there are high costs for bandwidth. We have said this once and again, but it is important to consider because we have lived this in the different communities. We see deficient basic electricity or electrical services. So why set up telecommunication networks and make them available to people if there is no electricity? Road access makes it much more difficult to repair equipment or bring inputs. And the other panelists have mentioned this before. The limited technical knowledge out in the territories. It makes it even much more difficult to have people be better prepared to fix difficulty in the territory. The high costs of accessing internet, although there are fiber optics networks in the different parts of the country, these communities do not have access to them because are not willing to provide those services to those communities. They are really not willing to take these services at an affordable cost to the communities. Now, the bandwidth connection should not exceed 2% of the per capita GDP, but this is not real. In our countries, at least in Colombia, this is approximately 3%. And for many poor communities, they must invest up to 20% of their income in having access to these technologies. So we have a problem of coverage and of cost. And additional, on the other hand, we add this the lack of relevant content for the community. So we're missing. We need to make more efforts to fund multimedia contents, audiovisual content from the communities themselves and that fit their needs, their idiosyncrasy, etc. There's lack of devices to have internet access, and all of this causes a lot of migration from the rural areas, loss of local memory, changes in local cultural practices, and limited access to other opportunities to develop skills. So there is so much more to say, but I believe it is very interesting that in the IICA's report, we highlight a series of alternatives, many governance alternatives, but other alternatives coming from the communities themselves, indigenous alternatives that seek. Well, we have many alternatives that bring urban solutions and that they want to extrapolate to rural areas, but these do not fit. These must be solutions that arise from the communities themselves, from the life of the communities themselves, and they must propose a different way of seeing technology. These are community network alternatives, voice or data networks that could be articulated and not with other regional and national networks for internet access, for example, that provide telecommunications services, telephony in areas that did not have coverage or the coverage was very deficient or very costly, and private operators did not want to provide connectivity in those areas. So these community networks have been acknowledged by several international actors. The ITU, for example, has mentioned these in several recommendations and reports. And just to tell you a bit about what these are about, these are networks driven by the communities themselves through small or medium-sized cooperatives, community groups that are in the territory, that live in the area. So since they are there, they know the territory. So what the telecommunications networks do are things that are adjusted to the local communities. They recognize their own needs, possibilities, their dreams, and are willing to work to achieve them. So they go beyond just the economic interest. They are wanted to work to improve the situation in these communities. So that is the advantage of being there present in the community. And obviously this contributes to the local economy. We have services that we pay amongst us all at a cost that is affordable as possible, but the income is distributed within the same community itself, where the sustainability models align to the local methods where there is a exchange through barter, not necessarily through monetary means. And we use whatever community a contribution can be provided. Territories are so diverse. So once they develop their own communication services, the communities share costs, the maintenance, they get the training, something that was encouraged much and mentioned in previous presentations. For the training, we look for partnerships. The communities cannot go along and do this on their own. Communities are protagonists, and through partnerships with actors from civil society, with the academia, or even with the government, and with international actors and private enterprise that want to work hand in hand with the communities are willing to provide this training. The communities gain autonomy, they strengthen their own processes, they feel empowerment over this technology, they strengthen linkages for community care through these networks, they generate their own content, and above all, these community communication projects diversify the list of services provided within the community. This is actual, this is real. And in the IICA report, there are some very good examples of Argentina and Mexico. We have also cases also in Colombia and Brazil, in different countries, of indigenous communities, Afro-descendant and neo-rural communities. These are very interesting. These new communities of people that decide to leave the cities, and they get organized. They develop their own communication strategy. They get the training. They develop content, and they work on sustainability projects. We must do away with the barriers, because in many countries there is a public policy that is missing. That is something that is open to these matters. There are hurdles. They only think of the commercial side. And so we have so many barriers to access to infrastructure, to spectrum, to trunk lines, fiber optics, the small scale and diversity of these solutions are not taken into account. Something else important to remember is the active participation of women. The figures really do not reveal that gap between men and women, but we need to create spaces for women to learn and build and develop their own technology so that their priorities and their needs can be discussed openly. It is not just going to come and to give a solution. No, we need to think about this. Sometimes the solutions from the city do not necessarily solve the issues of women in the rural areas. So it is important to have these specific areas to get together, get training, create the infrastructure and content by these women themselves. A phrase that was mentioned, or I saw in the report that I believe is relevant, is that there is not one single technological option. These must be selected according to the different contexts. And this is so important. We must take advantage of the different technologies under development and look for the ways to reduce costs. Fiber optics in rural areas, wireless technology for long distance contact. All of these can be, there is equipment available for this, and there are hardware and software free of charge under development. So these are good options that would help the communities have access to these technologies. And we must think that these technologies, in many cases, have very high import taxes and a purchase tax. So we have to think of how to lower taxes on this type of equipment. The technology under open networks is very important. We must be able to have access to funds to develop these new technologies, open-ended technologies, the circular economy. So we should, instead of negotiating with the big guys, we should work on what can be done locally. We know there's a lot of hard work to do, but why do we not support these initiatives at all levels? So we need to consider the diversity of actors that are working in the small scale communities, working with municipalities and groups of residents, knowing that their characteristics are completely different from those of traditional users. So there must be direct contact between communities, government, and other actors in the telecommunications network. When we think about the ecosystem, we rarely speak of people. People are, we see as users, and we should see them differently. We as communities, as individuals, are also active players in the telecommunication systems. We must examine new models that are developed for family agriculture, where we foster other values like non-competition, common goods, or shared goods, and models of fair trade, nonprofit trade, and we must consider the spiritual connection with the earth and the environment. When we work in rural areas, when the indigenous people, this is vital. Otherwise, we will come without respecting their territory, and the processes will certainly not meet their needs and will not help them move forward. We must consider there are models, alternative models. There is not just one model. There are multiple development models, and technologies must respond to those multiple models. And basically, that is what I wanted to share with you. I would like to thank you for including this in the report and highlighting the endogenous solutions where communities are key players and instead of passive players in all this effort. Thank you very much, Mrs. Chamorro, for your comments. We will now continue with Mr. Yacine Khelladi. And after Mr. Khelladi, we will have time for some questions and answers for the different panelists. Yacine Khelladi is an economist. For 26 years, he has been working in the region of Latin America and the Caribbean in technologies for development or digital transformation, investigating, designing, and implementing public national policies, digital regional agendas, accompanying projects for the strategic adoption and digitalization in all sectors from rural communities to economic sectors and public utilities. Since 2014, he has been coordinator for Latin America and the Caribbean of the Alliance for Affordable Internet, the largest global technological partnership that investigates good practices and accompanies transformation policies in order to make broadband more affordable and ensure significant connectivity for everyone. A4AI has developed a series of tools to integrate connectivity affordably and significantly to the digital agendas in an innovative framework to design public policies for rural bandwidth. Thank you very much, Yacine, for your comments. Your microphone is on mute. Oh, yes, excuse me. Okay, my clock is running. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank IICA, Mr. Otero, and Manuel, who coordinated my participation. I am almost the last, so I will go through this quite quickly. I must apologize to our interpreters if I go a bit too fast to talk about some matters that are worth exploring. I want to share this presentation with the panelists so everybody can explore what we are doing. First of all, allow me to talk about, well, first of all, what is our alliance? We are more than 100 organizations in an alliance that works precisely for that, to ensure universal significant access, transforming public policies and regulatory frameworks. This is a project that is lodged in the Web Foundation. It was created by the founder of Web Foundation, and we work in the global south, as it is called. We do not work in northern hemisphere countries, but more on the southern hemisphere. We work with a very interesting a research program with a lot of advocacy work, sharing global messages. And we work in specific countries, transforming, creating coalitions, multi-sectoral coalitions to transform public policies. Recently, maybe 4 or 5 months ago, we published a study for the ITU calculating how much it would cost to connect the global population over the age of 10 years, connected at speeds higher than 10 megabytes. Universal significant access, and I will use these terms many times, but with a good internet speed and quality. This cost was calculated at 428 billion US dollars, and part of this is in the Americas, and includes to connect those that are disconnected and improve the connectivity of those that are currently connected. Not only infrastructure, this cost also includes access to devices, skills, content, and initiatives to bridge the digital divide. For the Americas specifically, we calculate that a 10-year investment to reach the objective by 2030, the necessary investment, public and private, would be some $30 billion. In the study, you will see a list of countries and the different infrastructure and the necessary investment in infrastructure, the OPEX, and everything. We have this disaggregated between rural and urban. For the Dominican Republic, we see that the cost of urban infrastructure, this may sound strange that it is more than rural infrastructure, is because, oh, first of all, we have the definition of rural and urban, but anyway, we have these calculations by country and by region. Annually, we publish the access report, and this report has an index of drivers. Basically, this we measure access, but also public policies, a qualitative index of public policies to see what countries are implementing policies that really aim at access. And the affordability index that several people have mentioned, the 1 by 2, is something that we proposed and which was adopted by the United Nations. Here we can see in the content, the countries in gray we did not calculate. What is in green is below 2%, and orange is above 1%. In Central America, we see this, the affordability, and that is by country. If we measure it by GDP income, it would be very different. Very different. In Colombia, for example, data says broadband is affordable, but we see that 60% of the population does not have the means to pay for this. So that is why we need to disaggregate data by quintiles, by gender, and rural and urban. And here we will realize that affordability is basically the ability to pay bandwidth is very different. If a woman, if you live in the city or in the rural areas, if you are a man or a woman or etc. So I invite you to read this report because it shows the public policies that can improve this situation. And we have a very clear correlation between access and the implementation of these policies. That is why we want to transform these policies. Gender gap, this has been mentioned. The study also mentioned it. There's a whole chapter on that, so I will not dwell on it now. We work very closely on integration, a cross-cutting integration in all dimensions of the digital gap. We have a database of good practices that I can invite you to examine, and another report on the cost of mobile devices, how many work days a person would have to work in average to purchase a smart phone. Significant connectivity is a concept we launched earlier last year in 2020. And for COVID now, with COVID, it has become ever more important. And IICA study uses this significant connectivity definition, has adapted it and made its own calculations. So what is significant connectivity? First of all, why? Well, so far we say the connected or not connected, period. COVID has shown us clearly that it is not sufficient to be connected to get receive data once a week or once every 3 months. No, that is not enough. That cannot have an impact on the lives of people. So we need another type of measurement. And in this definition, we have proposed having them the connected, the poorly connected, and the well connected. So this is the foundation for that definition. We have 4 dimensions: speed, sufficient data, access to a device, and the daily use of the internet. A person that is well connected has more than 10 megabytes, can be connected from home, from school, from work, and uses internet daily with a smartphone. We did this calculation for several countries. Notice here for Colombia. Although nationally we said there is 84% of users that are well connected, it is really only 50%. So there's that 30% that is poorly connected. So with these colors, we can see the distribution: green, well connected; no, orange, poorly connected; and in lavender gray, not connected. So public policies needs to shift these around so that everybody can become green. So we are currently developing this methodology to measure and implement policies to ensure significant connectivity. And this is another work we did in 2020, the framework of public policies for rural bandwidth. We worked with several partnerships, APC, CIPESA, DEP, and others. We wanted to examine the digital gap, rural, urban. We measure a difference between 40 and 43% difference between rural and urban. And clearly, wanting this to be a successful policy that can learn from experiences, taking advantages of resources based on evidence with gender perspective, we wanted to improve high quality, affordable bandwidth in rural areas. So we propose that each country that has a digital policy, and people have to sit down to work together with people in technology and the ministries of telecommunications to ensure differentiated strategies that several people, speakers have already mentioned. The spectrum it cannot cost the same in the rural areas and in the urban areas. Taxes, models, licenses. The community networks need a completely differentiated system. The oversight to implement the infrastructure cannot be the same in the city and in the rural areas. There must be specific objectives for rural areas. So this framework, I know I'm going through this very quickly, I'm sorry, but proposes that we think of all these areas, examine them each to develop a specific policy for rural broadband. And that is very, very important for the authorities that have to do with regulation and with digital connectivity plans can integrate all of that. Something else I want to mention, and which I believe is important, is that this should all be integrated with agricultural or rural development policies. We cannot have a rural connectivity policy without it being articulated, connected to the agricultural policy. So we are now developing a series of tools to help the countries individually to develop their rural framework.
With that, I think I have closed my 10 minutes. And for that, we need to integrate policies. I am myself, I'm a small coffee producer of a rural area in Dominican Republic. So it's not enough for me. It's not really useful to know how much coffee is selling for in Amsterdam or elsewhere in Europe if the only person that buys coffee from me is someone from the next farm. So I depend on that price. I don't have a way to reach other markets. So information and access to market has to be part of, for example, the creation of a cooperative or a whole value chain. We can't see it as an isolated event, and by just accessing data or the internet, my small producer's reality will change. No, we have to bring those together. Policies have to be specifically geared at this significant connectivity that's affordable and universal, not just coverage. It's not enough for me to have coverage if I can't afford to pay for it or if it's not good quality data. Digital divides also lead to greater divisions in socioeconomic terms. If you don't have the good quality internet, then you will be poorer if you are living in the rural areas that are not well connected in the cities. Now, 5G, there's always that issue, but it's not so important for you to have 3, 4, or 5G. You have to be connected significantly to do all the activities you want to do. We also have to integrate a gender perspective, inclusion, no one left behind, everyone moving forward together, because if some move forward more quickly, we will be running behind. And measuring, sharing, and adopting good practices, acting together, collaborating to advance. I hope I did this in time. And all these studies and presentations are available in the webpage, and I can send this presentation as well. And again, apologies if I spoke too quickly.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias a
Thank you very much to all our speakers. It has been very interesting. We've had great presentations, and unfortunately, they were a bit extensive, so we don't have time for questions. We do see some questions coming up through our social media, and I'm sure that our colleagues at IICA will make these available for you to answer at your own time later. And before I give the floor back to the organizers at IICA, I would like to highlight some of the points you brought, the fact that we have great opportunities for development in the region if we reduce the digital divide. We all agree that we need clear public policies. We heard about the right to connectivity, the importance of education and training, and especially the importance of women and of ensuring women have access to technology, and also what we heard from Ms. Chamorro, that they have the right to, or the opportunity to reflect, communicate, and not just having policies handed to them, because it's very different to have a woman in a rural area or in an urban area. There's also the importance of community organizations. The last speaker was also very interesting in the fact that these policies have to be part of an agricultural policy. They don't have to be separate. And obviously, from the point of view of the private sector, we need public-private alliances to ensure an expansion of digitalization to have to close this digital divide. With that, thank you very much for wonderful presentations, very interesting. And thank you very much, IICA, for organizing this event. We have to perform these kinds of events, not just for Latin America, but for the whole world, in Africa, Asia. If I hear from the points brought here in reference to Latin America, there's many parallel situations worldwide, not just in the region. Thank you to organizers. And Manuel, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Guendel. The Director General of IICA, thank you as well. We are very pleased. Thank you all for your great presentations. We've received wonderful feedback and questions. We will compile the questions because we don't have time to answer them live online, but we will share them with each of you through other means so that we can answer them. I'd also like to remind you that we will continue next Thursday at 9:30 a.m. Costa Rica time. We will have a session on public policies to bridge the digital divide. We invite you all to join us so we may continue with the forum. Without anything to add, I thank you all again, and we are at your service.
Gracias, Yacine. Gracias, Pablo.
Gracias. Gracias.
Thank you, everyone.
Muchas gracias.